Hello everyone, and welcome to another one of my videos. Today is October 26th, it's Sunday, and I'm here to update you on my reading and writing. So I did not get much writing done last week. It was a very busy week for me at work. I tried to do some writing yesterday, but I didn't really get much accomplished. And it wasn't on my novel. The second novel that I'm working on. It was on a short piece of memoir that I'm working on, and um, this this piece, I sort of started it um, earlier this year. Part of it was in an email that I sent to some friends, and I just liked the way I wrote that section, and so I took that section out and I saved it in a Word file. And I've over the last few weeks I've been adding to it, and I like the content and I like the style, but I've basically written about 2,000 words at this point, and I don't actually have any idea where it's going or what it's doing. Like, it's just kind of memoir. And I think I'm realizing that I've reached a problem for me in that I don't really know how to write memoir. In that fiction, I mean, one of the reasons why I like novels rather than short stories is it's easier to get to a place where there's a feeling of completion, even if you haven't necessarily come to a sort of uh, neat little resolution. And with short stories, you kind of have to come to a resolution that's very quick and that still feels satisfying. And I think that's very hard to do. I think it's actually harder to do than write a novel, to be honest. Because so often when we come up with resolutions, they're supposed to kind of lift everything that you've just read and push it to something else, like move it to a higher level. And so often when people do this, they often just they turn their story into a fable, or like the whole point of the story becomes the moral. And often the moral is something kind of simplistic or very um, it just kind of reconfirms our own feelings about the world, in that it just kind of says what we all already believe. And I feel like sometimes the most uh, this, I think, is one of the issues that I have with a lot of short stories that I read, is that I'm often like, well, that was nice, it was very beautifully told, it was very wonderful, but at the same time, I just feel like you basically just told me that memory is memory plays tricks on us, um, relationships fall apart, or things like that, where um, it, the the kind of point or resolution it comes to is something so banal and cliched and well worn that I don't really care. So, um, so with stories, I think I found a way to kind of approach that. It's my own particular way of approaching it, in which I kind of try to do anti-resolutions, or try to find a way to um, think of a resolution that is not about someone learning, but is actually about someone unlearning something, or moving in a direction that's not necessarily the best, but is in some ways it is an ending. Like, it's I think when you have a character, if a character changes their mind in a particular way, um, and even though it's not necessarily the best way, or the way in which we should develop some sort of eternal truth about it or whatever, it's very true for this character, and therefore it's true as a it's interesting as a whole to read it. So that's how I kind of approach short fiction. But memoir is different in that you can't really change anything. Like, I can't, if I don't feel like the resolution is working well, I can't really change the facts of the matter of my life, unless I want to get away from it actually being memoir. but I do kind of want it to be memoir. I don't want it to be something made up. So it becomes like, how do you resolve it? And I think there's probably ways to do it. I just don't even know because I don't normally write memoir or do anything like that. Um, so it's something I have to really think about. Like I said, I've written 2,000 words. It's perfectly good. It's fine, but there's no feeling of like it doesn't lift. It doesn't go anywhere, and I have to kind of sort that out, figure it out what I'm going to do. So there's that. The other thing that I was thinking about was, I went to see Karl Ove Knausgaard. There was a master class held by my old master's program, and the program coordinator, Catherine Bush, interviewed Karl Ove Knausgaard, and it was a one-on-one interview thing, and it was really nice. I really loved it. I really enjoyed it, actually. It was probably the highlight of my week. And, he was talking about how um, what he did to write a 6-volume, basically memoir, or I guess memoiristic novel, that has since become incredibly popular and he's become very successful. And, you know, he said at one point that he doesn't think about the reader at all, that he just writes, and that at the best times in his life have been, or the best writing that he's done in his life have been the moments when he's actually not thinking about the reader and kind of in this zone of being kind of selfless. And uh, I think it's a nice idea. I think it's a little romantic, to be honest. This whole idea that you can escape from yourself and become selfless. I'm not saying that he's not a very smart person. He's a very smart person, but I feel like sometimes the European writers in particular have decidedly more kind of romantic ideals about things sometimes. Um, and he said a lot of times that he made his decisions based upon intuition. And I think partially that's due to the fact that he's written a lot. When he was writing the novels, he was basically writing for 6 hours a day. And he obviously made enough money doing, I guess, writing his novels or doing something that he could do that. So he just simply, in some ways, I think he developed his skill or his intuition about things through simply brute work. He just kept doing it, and he eventually was able to come up with something very interesting and different. Um, but it does sometimes make you wonder, um, like, you know, I think sometimes, well, I mean, he was very encouraging towards everyone, which is kind of silly. I mean, you can't really believe that a crowd of 40 people are all going to become well respected or well known writers. Um, but he was very encouraging to us. Um, but I think what it does make me sort of consider or try to be more aware of is the fact that we, you know, he said I developed a lot of my decisions based upon intuition, and you have to sometimes kind of wonder, is how much of this is his own work and how much of it is natural gift. How much of, and I don't necessarily mean that he has a natural gift for great writing, but that he is a natural gift. He naturally understands what other people want, and so that's why he doesn't have to think of the reader. And I think I sort of wonder if I have a bit of, I think I have certain roadblocks in my own personality that prevent me from kind of achieving this level of intuition. He talked particularly about being really wanting to be part of a group of like-minded people, and I feel the same way as well. But I think he was more successful at it And I struggle at it, and I think partially because I have this natural anxiety around groups, and I feel very uncomfortable around groups, and I feel whenever I'm in a group, I feel a lot of pressure, and I naturally want to disagree with everyone in the group just simply because I feel I get really uncomfortable when everyone agrees on something. And I think that's, I wonder if that's maybe, part of my personality that really prevents me from moving further with my writing, in that I am not trying to, I kind of willing, I kind of put up too many roadblocks in the way I write, or the way I approach my writing, or the way I approach the world, um, because I'm afraid of um, having people agree with me, or starting to feel like I'm part of a community, because then I start to feel like, oh no, no, this is the wrong way. I'm going the wrong way. If everyone is agreeing with me and I feel comfortable, then I feel very anxious about it. And I have to look back on my past and see that there's been several times when I have been on the road to having more success than I have now, and I have purposely sabotaged them because I felt very uncomfortable with that whole feeling of, oh, if people are agreeing with me, then that means there's something wrong. So I have to wonder if maybe I'm not constitutionally made up to be successful at what I'm doing. And you know, I think that's okay. I think it's okay. I think sometimes sometimes we spend a lot of time trying to develop the winning conditions in our own personality. Like these videos in many ways are that. Trying to figure out the perfect way to approach a project so that when we start doing the project, it's going to have no problems or issues or anything like that. And I think I'm starting to realize that there are parts of my personality that are actively working against me in terms of doing well at particular projects. And maybe I shouldn't worry so much about trying to fix them, and just kind of accept them, be aware of them, but kind of accept them and accept the kind of limitations it's going to put on me and my writing. I mean, at the same time, you don't want to be fatalistic about things, but um, you should be realistic about things. You should be realistic about, uh, you know, that I might have a capacity for self-sabotage in many ways. So I don't know. Um, it was a very engaging talk. It's like he is a very smart person, and not just a smart person, but a very like he can project a considering he's written a 6 volume book and he's quite famous in literary circles. Um, he projects a warmth in his persona, and he does not seem arrogant in any way, and seem very thoughtful, and willing to answer questions that he's probably answered 1,000 times. Because there were some people who were asking questions, and I was like, I'm sure he's answered this like a dozen times. Like someone asked him why he called the book My Struggle, which is in German and Norwegian, has the same title um, as Hitler's Mein Kampf. And I mean that's like the first question you ask him if ever you run into him. So I'm sure he's answered it 100 times, and he answered it really nicely and was polite. And and in actuality, I was quite happy to hear his response, because there was a lot of things that I didn't know about why he named it that. Um, so yes, the I did want to mention how much I enjoyed the talk, and I got him to sign my book. I don't know if you can see that. So very happy about that. I also asked a question, and he liked my question, and I have been. This is how sad I am. I've been riding the high that produced for about um, pretty much until today. It happened on Friday. Um, but it was actually like I think why he liked it was because it was actually a question I think I have been thinking about a lot, and it was about how he uses or he doesn't use symbols in his book, and I think it's quite natural for us to want to start putting symbols into a work, and before he did his talk, he mentioned something about he did a he read a passage, and part of it was the end of it was like trying to avoid the sublime. And so I asked him how, when you're writing, did you manage to do that? And he was thinking about it, and he didn't really come up with a huge answer, but I think it was because it was actually an, a new question for him. He did say he tried to avoid metaphorical language. Um, and I mean, that's very true. The writing is very plain, and it does not seem in any way like it's trying to reach for something beautiful. So that was exciting. That was exciting to hear him talk. He also said some really amazing things. He said, uh, in writing, you want to create a room that allows you to have a certain emotion in it. And I thought that was really interesting because I've been thinking more about how rooms and places really do allow for certain different types of ways of being. Um, it's been in my head since I read the beginning of the David Byrne book about how music has really been affected. The development of popular music has really been affected by the places in which it was able to be performed. So there's been lots of ways in which it's changed depending upon the room in which it is in. And I think, you know, really, in terms of the way literature is changing now with how it's being read and where it's being read and what types of literature are being read in these formats, it really does change the emotions and feelings and ideas that can be expressed in them. So, yeah, I really like that. He said a whole bunch of other things. Like I said, really smart guy. Great person to hear from. Wonderful experience. So I mentioned last time that I was close to finishing Our Lady of the Flowers. I finished it. It was very good. Um, it's not, as I said, not a. You don't read it and go, "Oh, this is a book that's filled with narrative," and I'm going to zoom along. Has no narrative whatsoever, but is filled with. Um, his writing is incredibly imagistic and beautiful, but in a thoroughly non-cheesy way, and um, I'm a sucker for that, for someone who's able to create um, like fantastic imagery that in no way feels cloying and ugh, cliched and ugh. And so that's amazing. In fact, when I was reading it, this is kind of the weird thing. The author that I thought it was most kind of associated with, or the author that I felt like had some underground connections with Genet, was Gabriel Garcia Marquez, which is like on the surface a weird connection, but they both have this sort of, they're both they're very interested in the human, particularly the bodily human, and they take a kind of over romantic and um, a little bit hysterical view of the world. Um, and there's like there's not really magical moments in Jean Genet, but everything is so ridiculous that it does feel magical at times. And he goes off into fantasy a little bit at points. So yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting because I love Marquez as well, and so seeing similarities between the two of them is something I totally fine with. Um, so I finished that, and I'm currently reading. I'm getting my hipster bona fides. I'm getting my hipster passport renewed by reading "Leaving the Atocha Station" by Ben Lerner, because he's the new book out, and I felt I should read this one first so that I was caught up. It's super easy to read. It's a breeze. After reading Genet, this is like I don't know. this is I'm a writer, and I feel like Liz Lemon in that creativity is like a bird that shoots ideas. That's how I feel right now. Uh, yeah, it's good. In some ways, it's a terrible thing. In some ways, I feel like he writes like me, which is the worst feeling in the world because um, he's obviously successful and I'm not, and obviously I think he's. I'm not saying that I'm as good as him or anything, but his stylistic choices are often very similar to what I would choose, except I don't want to go. He goes beautiful, and I don't really like to go beautiful as much. Um, and I kind of hate the main character. I kind of want to punch him in the face as I'm reading this. If I met him in real life, I would hate him so much. So that's a big problem for me. Um, I don't know. I think otherwise I'm enjoying it. Apart from the fact that I kind of hate the main character. I mean, I think partially you're supposed to kind of hate him. He's a little bit of a well, he calls himself a little bit pretentious, and he's a he's he's a jerk. Like he lies and stuff. And I think you're supposed to kind of appreciate that he's a jerk who, talks about his bad behavior and everything. And theoretically, I like that sort of thing, but at the same time, I feel like particularly straight males are congratulated a lot on their own ability dis- to describe their own failings and yet still be considered charming or wonderful. And I'm like, you know, I don't really care that much. I don't care that you've kind of that you're like a bad person, but that you recognize it. And it's like, oh, like honestly, I don't know. I mean, I'd probably be more interested if a woman was writing this book and she wrote that way. But at the same time, I'd still be annoyed with it. Um, that whole Kathleen Hale business that happened this last week or so, I felt interested by what she was talking about, but at the same time, I feel a little bit complicit when people write memoirs about their bad behavior and then want us to kind of congratulate them on it. Or I don't even know how you're supposed to react to it. Are you supposed to go, um, that's great, you were a bad person? I mean, I suppose what I'm looking for is I want something beyond just, oh, you're telling me about how terrible your bad behavior was, um, which I I don't necessarily always feel from these type of narratives. I often feel like just the fact that you're telling me that you had bad behavior, that's enough. And like you could say that my struggle is a bit like that, where there's like he talks about some of the bad things he does and how much of a jerk he was when he was a teenager. But it feels like the bad behavior in this is just a part of his whole project of just talking about everything. Whereas in leaving the Atocha station, I feel like it's just about how he's kind of a jerk. I don't know. Anyway, I'm still gonna read it. It's enjoyable. It's not difficult at all, so I can definitely read it on the subway or whenever I'm commuting. So, and as I said, I feel like I will be. I mean, it's. I wouldn't identify as a hipster, but I think people would peg me as a hipster. I've been told by my students that I'm a hipster, um, and so I feel like I have to read this. You have to. Just it's something you're supposed to do. So anyway, this has been a long one. You know what? I don't care. I don't care. It's been a long one. If you're actually watching this, hopefully you don't care either. In any case, I hope to see you next week. And until then, have a good week. I'll try to do some good writing or at least some good reading. Bye bye.